Welcome to today's webinar on the issue of tobacco product waste with a focus on New York State. I'm Zohal Khan. I am a staff attorney here at the Public Health Law Center, where I work on the commercial tobacco control team with a focus on New York State. And before we proceed any further, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the history that the land that the Public Health Law Center sits on in St. Paul, Minnesota. These are the tribal and treaty homelands of the Dakota Oyate people who are part of the larger Sioux Nation. We also acknowledge the regional territory of the Ojibwe, also known as the Chippewa and Anishinaabe people, and we acknowledge the ancestral connection of the Ho-Chunk Nation to that region. Since we are going to be discussing the state of New York today, we'd also like to acknowledge the ancestral homelands of the Lenni Lenape, Mohican, and Haudenosaunee peoples, which includes the Seneca, Oneida, Cayuga, Tuscarora, Onondaga, and Mohawk nations. And we also acknowledge the ancestral connection of 13 native tribes to Long Island, including the Shinnecock and Ungachog nations. If you're not familiar with us, the Public Health Law Center is a national nonprofit that works to reduce and eliminate the use of commercial tobacco, promote healthy food, support physical activity, tackle climate change, and address other causes of chronic disease. Our campus is based in St. Paul, Minnesota at the Mitchell-Hamlin School of Law, and we have partnered with the New York State Department of Health and other tobacco control professionals, partners, and advocates in their work to end the commercial tobacco epidemic. And under this partnership, we are also known as the Center of Excellence in Tobacco Policy. In terms of what we do provide legal technical assistance, including help with legal research, assistance with policy development, and we may provide litigation support, such as by filing amicus or friend of the court briefs in high impact cases. We develop publications that explain complex public health and policy issues, and we run trainings on commercial tobacco control topics. It is important to note that we do not provide direct representation and we do not lobby. I'd also like to point out that when we say commercial tobacco, we are not referring to the traditional use of tobacco by indigenous communities. Tobacco has been used by many American Indian communities for spiritual and healing purposes for thousands of years. What we are tackling specifically is commercialized tobacco, which excludes traditional use. And all of our work at the center is grounded in health equity. We're committed to removing all institutional barriers and applying an equity lens to our work to produce the best results for the communities that we serve. It's important to remember that people are situated differently, so the same policy approach will impact different groups in different ways. It's also important to keep in mind the different social determinants of health, such as financial and social status, for instance. There are many factors that can affect people's health, and it's important to keep that in mind when considering policy proposals. So, for instance, imposing monetary penalties on someone who is struggling economically will contribute negatively to the social determinants that can lead to further adverse health outcomes. And let's move on to our topic for today, tobacco product waste. At the Public Health Law Center, we define that as any component, part, or remnant of any commercial tobacco product. So that can include waste that is produced from the use of a tobacco product, such as cigarette butts, cigar tips, and wrappers, e-cigarettes or vapes, cartridges for those products, and any packaging or incidental waste, such as lighters or matches, whether or not it contains tobacco or nicotine. And tobacco product waste is often considered hazardous waste due to the presence of dangerous substances such as nicotine, toxic metals and chemicals, and lithium-ion batteries in e-cigarettes. And we've got some pictures there of some tobacco litter. If you didn't know, cigarette butts are the most commonly littered item in the world, as 850,000 tons of cigarette butts end up as litter annually worldwide. That's 30 times the weight of the Statue of Liberty. Cigarette butts are not biodegradable, common to popular belief, and they are actually made of cellulose acetate, which is a type of plastic. The toxic substances within cigarette butts make them hazardous waste as well, and those substances can include nicotine, cadmium, lead, and arsenic. As they break down, cigarette butts leach those chemicals, heavy metals, and microplastics into the environment, and those substances can disrupt ecosystems as they collect in the soil and waterways. So for instance, cigarette butt substances have been shown to inhibit plant growth. E-cigarettes aren't any better and no kinder to the environment, but they're also considered hazardous waste and electronic waste. And many e-cigarettes contain lithium batteries that are prone to explosions and fires when disposed of improperly. They also leach microplastics and toxins. The body of the e-cigarette is usually made of plastic, and then there's a lithium ion battery inside of it. And they leach highly concentrated amounts of liquid nicotine. Nicotine is considered an acute hazardous waste that was once used as a pesticide in the US until it was banned because of its negative impact on bee populations. E-cigarettes also contain heavy metals like nickel and lead, which can contaminate the ground and water. And they've been falsely marketed as disposable by the tobacco industry, but they are anything but. Safely disposing of them and trying to recycle their parts is incredibly difficult, and the average user is uninformed about that reality. They cannot be thrown into the regular trash or recycling, and the lithium batteries, especially in the newer models, cannot be removed, which makes disposal even more challenging. They may end up in the trash as litter on the street, or unfortunately, as we've been hearing more and more, flushed down a school toilet by an underage user. Okay, and that covers our introduction. And without further ado, I'd like to turn to our wonderful speakers today. We've got 5 speakers for you. And first up, we have Dr. John Atkinson, an environmental engineering professor at the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences at the University of Buffalo. Dr. Atkinson's work is driven by an overarching desire to more sustainably produce and consume. With ongoing funding from New York State and US National Science Foundation, as well as local industry, Dr. Atkinson is currently researching within the broad field of waste management, using life cycle analysis tools to investigate plastics and tire recycling, waste disposal options, and energy recovery. And I will stop sharing and turn it over to Dr. Atkinson.
All righty, here we go. I want to begin with what I think is the most important thing I'll say here, and that's just thank you. I have been fortunate to have a few conversations with Zohal and Kelly and other folks at the Public Health Law Center, and they've been fascinating. I think we've impressed each other with our diverse perspectives on some of these issues. And when I had a chance to look at the attendee list before this meeting, I knew 0 people. I might have known 0 organizations. Academics are quite bad at getting out of their comfort zones and speaking to people and organizations and groups that they're not used to speaking to. And I think by giving me this stage, Zohal and Kelly and the Public Health Law Center have really provided me with that opportunity, which I'm very grateful for. And I'm grateful to everybody here for listening to what I have to speak about. My name's John Atkinson. I'm a professor at SUNY Buffalo, State University of New York at Buffalo. I'm the Stevens Chair in Engineering Sustainability, and I'm also an associate professor in environmental engineering. And a lot of the work I do is focused on microplastics these days. And one more thing, you might notice my beautiful background. That's not a filter. That's really my background to really highlight how grateful I am for this opportunity. I'm currently on sabbatical in Costa Rica, and I'm not really saying yes to many things, but this was an opportunity that truly just means so much to me that I didn't want to pass up. So really, really excited to be here. Sun's in my eyes, it's 90 degrees, but this is a wonderful thing to be able to contribute to. No matter where I'm presenting, I start off all my presentations with this slide. And I think the job of people that work in sustainability, like myself, is to address this exact issue, moving from a reactive system to one that is proactive. In my mind, sustainability tools, sustainability education, sustainability discussions, papers, policies are all aimed at, in some way, shape, or form, moving from a reactive system to a proactive system. I'm an environmental engineer. I'm trained as an environmental engineer. And what environmental engineers often do is clean up problems, right? So a problem happens and we come in and try to clean it up. In environmental engineering, it's a pollution problem. What I'm trying to do and educate students to do and educate attendees at workshops like this to do is to flip that and really start at the front end. Really start at how can we develop systems, develop policies, develop technologies that are proactive in nature. They're not creating a new problem that we're going to have to fix somewhere down the road. And the way that I focus on this in my own in my own teaching and my own research is in the field of waste management. So I'll start with two quick examples, and then we'll talk about cigarettes. I'll just say the details of these examples don't matter if you're not versed in life cycle assessment and things like that. Just think about it from kind of the bigger picture of what we're trying to do here at Buffalo. So the first is dealing with tires, scrap tires. In the US, in New York State, we generate something like 20 million tires a year. Those tires have to go somewhere. And the typical place for them to go has been landfills or incinerators. And so we're trying to figure out new places for them to go where they're not going to cause new problems down the road or new air pollution issues if we're burning them. And the one that we're focusing on right now is cutting them up and putting them into roadways. And before doing that, before starting a giant experiment where we replace, a chunk of I-90 with rubber modified asphalt, we need to do the work to see, is this going to be beneficial? We need to get ahead of the problem before it starts. And so I use life cycle assessment tools, and we're looking at, if we compare the new product that we're proposing as opposed to the existing product, will it be better or will it be worse? And so that's what some of these results are showing. We're optimistic that it'll be better. This is another one, plastic films. Plastic films are trash. Okay, they don't go in the recycling bin. Yeah, we have some retail return centers, but that's a really tricky recycling process. So multi-layer plastic films are generally trash. And we're trying to figure out, do they have to be? Is there a new recycling process that can be developed? Where should that recycling facility go? What should it do? What materials should be accepted? And we're using life cycle assessment tools to really get at the heart of what would be the impact of such a plan before that plan is enacted. Well, what I'm going to talk about today is cigarette filters. I will note that all of the stuff that I'm going to present is a work in progress. I don't have like a ton of fancy data and graphs and things like that to show, but I'm going to talk about our approach. I'm going to talk about the topics that we're interested in and the ways that we're tackling some of those problems. But to be able to do that, I have to acknowledge my funding. My funding for this project comes from New York State, the Department of Environmental Conservation. We've had several projects with DEC. They're absolutely wonderful sponsors, smart, interesting people, great to work with. And DEC established a plastics recycling center at UB. And that center is very interdisciplinary. That's what I absolutely love about their approach, is that it's not just engineers tackling something super narrow or chemists tackling super narrow topics. The way that we're approaching the problem of plastics in the environment and plastic use and plastic economics and recycling is by having an interdisciplinary team. So we have environmental folks listed here. We have chemical engineers. We have folks that are experts in public communication. We have business folks. And it's really the combination of all these expertises that allow us to make a dent on the issue of plastics. But the one that I'm interested in is plastics in the natural environment, which is obviously the link here, right? This is where the microplastics associated with cigarette filters will come in. And within this topic, I want to first say that I get a lot of phone calls from people that say, hey, do you think there's a microplastic issue here? If we sample our water, do you think there's microplastics? If we sample our air even, do you think there's microplastics? I'll just say the answer is yes. There's microplastics everywhere. They are absolutely in every source of water. They're in every air sample that you can measure. They're in the most remote lakes in the most remote places of the world. We use a lot of plastic, and we don't have a good way of managing. And so what I'm trying to do, though, is not just make measurements. I'm trying to really understand the sources and the impacts of these plastics. And to do that, I'm focusing on 4 different categories. So I'm only going to talk about cigarettes, but we're also doing work with wastewater treatment plants to see if the methods used at filtration or at wastewater treatment plants can control some of these microplastic issues. We're looking at if there's ways to measure microplastics without the fancy microscopes and chemicals and filters that I have access to in a lab. So comparing with citizen science work. I'm going to talk about cigarettes. And then we're also developing a workshop for all of New York State stakeholders that have something to say about microplastics. It should not be just academics in the room. It is the same approach as this webinar here. So in the space of cigarettes, I start with this photo because I honestly don't think that many people know how big of a source of microplastics a cigarette filter can be. This photo was taken in my front yard. You can see I need to grow my grass a little bit better, but the filter that you're looking at is a combination of 10 to 15,000 microfibers. And those microfibers, as Zohal mentioned in the introduction, are made of plastic. This is just in my front yard, 10 feet from my door. Okay, you can find photos like this anywhere, on the street, in your yard, in a national park. Microfibers are associated with cigarette filters. They are everywhere. So just a little bit of general introduction before I get to the stuff that we're working on. As I said, there's an estimate of 12 to 15,000 microfibers per cigarette filter. They are made of cellulose acetate, as Zohal mentioned. They don't biodegrade at the rate that anybody, has sort of any meaningful impact. There's a few papers out there that say no, yes, cellulose is a natural material, but the process of making cellulose acetate sort of removes some of those natural biodegradable properties. And I will say that in general, if you look at the literature, if you look at the work that's out there on cigarette pollution, there's quite a bit of work in that space. But all of that work, almost 100%, is really focusing on the cigarette butt as a whole. Okay, it's a macro pollution issue. So what my group and my students and I and our collaborators are really trying to do is assess this not as a macro pollution issue, but as a micro pollution issue. And sometimes I say, I'm going to use my hands here. If the scope of macro pollution is this, if you expand that to micro pollution, it might be huge. It might be beyond the camera here. It could be huge. Microplastics can get anywhere. And so that's what we're trying to get at. We are years away from that. Okay, spoiler alert. I'm not going to be sharing, a beautiful map that shows the path of where microplastics are going, at least not yet. But that's the mindset that we have, and that's the approach that we're trying to take here. But to be able to do that, we have to start with simple questions. Okay, how do you count these things? Okay, nobody can just look at this and say, oh yeah, that looks like 11,962 microfibers. So we're trying to develop some methods that make it easier to count these microfibers so that we have a better understanding of what loading is occurring into the environment. So I'll show you a couple photos and I'll give you some details about our approaches there. We're trying to understand how quickly the microplastics are released into the environment, and more importantly, I would say, what affects those release rates. A smoker throws a cigarette butt on the ground and doesn't think anything of it. But from a microplastic perspective, everything can matter. Do they throw it into a puddle of water? Does a car drive over it? Do people walk on it? Does the paper get released at a different rate? Is it in the sun or is it in the shade? There's no research out there that really does a great job of quantifying how all of those very important variables affect microfiber release rates. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then these ones that are italicized, I just will put on one slide and kind of quickly go through. I don't have a lot of images and stuff for those. I want to make sure that I don't go over time. It's the absolute worst when the first speaker goes long, so I will not do that. Okay, so in terms of quantifying microfibers, we're working with computer programming. So my students are becoming experts in a software system that's called Python. And what we're trying to do, excuse me, take some water here. What we're trying to do is develop a piece of software that we can feed in an image of the microfibers and have the software just tell us what's there. Okay, rather than having my student go fiber by fiber by fiber and, oh, is that one broken or is that one just bent? To have a computer system that has read enough images that it can just look at it and tell you what's there. And so what I'm showing you in this photo is the process or the approach, kind of where we're at. So in a very simple drawing, this is just a drawing in Microsoft Paint or PowerPoint, something like that. It does a great job. Obviously there's 5 squiggly lines there. It counts 5 fibers. But when it gets to a more complex image, in this case, it's overestimating. Obviously, there's not 350 fibers there. And so what we're doing is we're trying to modify this program so that we can, of course, have more accuracy and use it with more rapidity, because we have to be able to understand exactly what's there. Okay, to really have any potential of making an impact here, we need to know what we're working with. And so developing methods that don't require a student to sit in front of a microphone for 8 hours, a microscope for 8 hours is absolutely essential. The other way that we're trying to do this is with filtration methods. So you can imagine a scenario where you take a giant bucket of water, let's say a 5-gallon bucket of water, and you disperse all of the microfibers from one cigarette into that bucket of water. Okay, now filtering 5 gallons of water is hard. That's going to take a lot of time. There's going to be a whole bunch of fibers. It's going to be very difficult. But if we can be confident that the fibers are very well dispersed, then we could just take a little amount of that water. Let's say 100 cubic centimeters, a fraction of the full 5 gallons. We can measure the number of fibers in that small aliquot, and then we can scale it up and say, well, if there was this many in that, then there would be this many in 5 gallons. Okay, so it's a much more practical approach. And that's what we're trying to do here. Now you can see, I'm showing you the struggles of research here. It's hard to do. And the reason it's hard to do is because right now the filters that we're using are white, and the fibers that are in the filters are white. And so it's very challenging to differentiate between them. And so we're looking at methods that can stain the fibers so that they sort of stand out on an image as opposed to the white background that they're on, and looking at different methods of thinking about how to color these species so that they are a little more distinct. Okay, we also want to know how quickly they're getting dispersed. And again, research should be simple, right? If the research questions are very complicated, it's impossible to answer them. Right? We need to start simple. And that's exactly what we're doing here. So you could just throw a cigarette butt on the ground and you have this cylindrical, very nice, perfectly shaped filter. Okay, what happens to it? How quickly do the microplastics come off that? What happens if that filter is frayed? In the middle photo here, you have a filter that's, we just kind of pull it apart a little bit. Do the fibers come off faster, or do they come off slower? And what happens if you unwind the whole thing? Does that have any impact on the rate at which these microfibers are being released into the environment? This is a question that's focusing on the physical aspects of the fibers. Okay, we're not getting into the chemistry yet. That's one of our plans in the future. But we can't go there until we just understand how these fibers are ending up in the water in the first place. And so that's what I'm showing you here. And you can't see in these photos, but you can trust me when I say, if I had a better camera, on the top of each of these filters, you can actually see individual fibers floating around. Okay, so without a doubt, all of these are releasing microfibers, and we have reason to think that the more damaged the filter is, the more microfibers are being released into the environment. Similarly, agitation. Okay, so we're thinking about if a fiber is just sitting stagnant, in a puddle of water, let's say, as opposed to some sort of flowing water or some sort of moving system, how does that agitation affect the fiber release rates? So what we're working on here is we have shaker tables, and we have, just beakers sitting on a flat surface and not moving. And then we filter them afterwards and we see, okay, in this one we had this many fibers released, and in this one we had that many fibers released, and have a better understanding of how real world situations are affecting the rate at which microfibers from cigarette filters are ending up in the environment. Similarly, the paper, okay, that surrounds the filter. You all on this conference call know far more than me about the individual aspects of a cigarette, but I do have some understanding of the paper layers that are there. And I think this photo does a good job of showing you the two pieces of paper, the tipping paper and the plug wrap paper. And so what we're trying to understand is, again, if that paper is present, does it trap in those microfibers? You know, when they only have one surface to exit from, what impact does that have? Or if one of the pieces of paper is removed, what impact does that have? If they're both removed, what impact does that have? So same experiments. These are simple questions, okay? But the impact of understanding their answers can be huge and will lead to more complicated, more real world questions. And that's really the approach to all the research that I work on. Start easy. And the other topics that I'm thinking about, my students are literally in the, or at least they should be, they're 3,000 miles away from me right now, but they should be in the lab working on as we speak, are listed here. So sunlight. Sunlight is a big one. Things decay at different rates with UV radiation, with temperature that's associated with sunlight. There's lots of examples of plastic degradation in sunlight and fraying happening at different rates in sunlight. You know, people have studied, you know, what happens when you throw your PET bottle into a lake and it's in the sun, it's not in the sun. So we're trying to understand specifically from the space of microfibers associated with cigarette butts, what is the role of sunlight? Does it mean faster physical decay? Does it mean faster release rates from the cigarette butt? Does it have an impact on the chemistry? And that feeds into the second point that we're thinking about at UB, chemical leaching. And this is something that Zohal also mentioned, and I know that the following speaker, my Buffalo friend Jenna, is going to talk a little bit about. If you put a cigarette butt in water, it's going to look gross. Okay, it's going to leach out all the stuff that filter has been capturing. Okay, and all of that's going to enter into the aqueous system that you put it in. There's some research on how that works and the kinetics at which that happens. But what happens if instead of a cigarette butt, you're releasing 15,000 microfibers? Do the chemicals leach faster? Do they leach slower? Do they leach into different locations? That's the type of stuff that we're thinking about, and actually going to be working with the folks at Roswell in Buffalo, where Jenna's from, on addressing. And then last but not least, we want to know where this stuff is going. The interesting aspect of cigarette filters is the fact that they're made of cellulose acetate. We don't use cellulose acetate. In the world of plastics, cellulose acetate is not actually a super popular one. And so what that means is if you find cellulose acetate in the environment, you actually have a decent idea where it came from, because there's not a lot of people using cellulose acetate in their products. We typically, when we think of plastics, we're talking about PET, we're talking about HDPE, we're talking about styrofoam, we're talking about PVC. Nobody's talking about cellulose acetate. And so I think that will provide us with a really unique opportunity to track where these microfibers specifically from cigarette butts are going. And again, trying to see if this is the circle for macroplastics associated with cigarettes. Is this the circle for microplastics? So I'm at exactly 20 minutes. I would again like to thank PHLC and everybody here. I did not plan to be talking to 150 cigarette experts, but that is absolutely fantastic. I'm honored to do it and really looking forward to the next presentations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Atkinson, for that informative presentation. And then we'll move right on to Jenna Brinkworth of Roswell Park Comprehensive Cancer Center. Jenna is the Community Outreach and Engagement Coordinator of Tobacco Free Roswell Park, which was established in July 2019 to address new initiatives such as reducing the prevalence of cigarette butt litter and reducing the high rates of smoking amongst the LGBTQ community. She leads the Western New York Youth Anti-Vaping Coalition to support schools and parents to educate and prevent the use of e-cigarette products among youth. Jenna has worked in tobacco control and wellness for the past 30 years. Her prior work includes a role at the American Lung Association of Western New York and as the coordinator of the Erie Niagara Tobacco Free Coalition, which was the catalyst behind the Erie County Clean Indoor Air Act, which went into effect in 1998. It was this act that changed smoking as a norm while protecting public health. Jenna has also worked for the city of Buffalo and the Erie County Department of Health. Take it away, Jenna.
Okay, thank you so much, Zola. And I also really want to thank everyone who is here today, taking the time to learn about this very important topic. One of the things that I've really enjoyed about working in this area of tobacco waste over about the last 4 years is the opportunity for that aha moment with people. The light bulb goes off. They're like, oh my gosh, yes, cigarette butts are tiny trash. They're pollution, they're litter. We need to do something. And once you start noticing them, once you start looking on the ground and you pay attention, you are just never going to unsee them again. They're absolutely everywhere. And I can't thank all the partners who are on today and all of you participating, because we can all make a difference with this. And just talking to people about the issue and being more aware, knowing that they don't easily biodegrade, they leach, all of the things that John covered, and all of the fabulous research that's now going on, we're really heading in the right direction to make a difference. So I work at Roswell Park Comprehensive Cancer Center. We have a big tobacco control program here. And the head of our department, Dr. Andrew Hyland, who's chair of health behavior here, about 4 years ago asked our team to start to try to do something about building awareness around this issue, reducing the prevalence of cigarette butts, seeing that we are working very hard to prevent people from smoking, to help people stop smoking. But we also have an environmental issue with this product that is very important, and clearly much work needs to be done. Now, when Dr. Hyland brought this up to me, I thought, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to get people interested, enthusiastic, on board with these nasty, disgusting cigarette butts that are all over the place? But recognizing that we could not do this on our own, we started reaching out and working with and speaking with the different environmental groups that are in our area of Buffalo, New York. And luckily we have quite a few, all doing fantastic work. And once we started meeting with them, they were quick to come on board and quick to agree that this is far too prevalent, much needs to be done, and it's a big issue. It was also clear that they were very willing to help us, to support us, but they had a whole menu of other pollutants and problems that they were trying to deal with regarding the environment. And that's worked out just fine. We are, our focus, our area of work is really in the cigarette butt litter end, also starting to roll in more of the e-cigarette waste, as we've seen here today, which we cannot ignore. And started building together folks that all cared about this issue in different ways. We have a strong waterkeeper group here. Waterkeeper obviously is very involved with the water and the purity of our water. They've been fantastic partners. We even have some unusual suspects, such as NFTA. The NFT is very concerned about their carbon footprint. They're working with us to get folks free rides out to environmental events and things where they can learn about these things. The sewer authority, as John alluded to, these products quite often the litter goes right down the storm drains, and it's a sewer authority's problem. And businesses, so many businesses are sick and tired of having cigarette butts all over the front of their businesses. So there's a wide scope of folks that can come on board. We even have an artist who does artwork in microplastics. And my big dream is to have some fantastic piece of art that shows just how awful cigarette butts are, that we can move around to different places to spread the awareness. So from our end, I'm really here to talk about sort of boots on the ground, community engagement type of work that we've been doing in the Buffalo area on this very new issue, right? There really is no playbook as far as I know of that is out there to address this issue. But we did bring together a coalition. We have a Kick Butts Collaborative, which we have about 15 active members, different agencies, including concerned citizens, who come together. We meet about every 6 weeks. We support each other's events. We share on social media what we're doing. I go to cleanups all the time. They often give me the floor to talk about cigarette butts. Our partners have included cigarette butts more often in their training. I love nothing more than when I'm at a waterkeeper presentation, teaching their ambassadors about being ambassadors for their programs. And they have 3 slides on cigarette butts that wouldn't have been there before we started talking about this issue with them. The school programs that a lot of these agencies are doing, they're also folding in the whole issue of cigarette butts with the kids. And there's so much opportunity to get kids on board with this type of an issue. So the collaboration has been a win-win, and we in turn, of course, involve them with the different things that we're doing. And I want to share with you some of the sort of the internal projects that we've come up with that we hope are spreading the word about this. So we have started a program called Bloom's Not Butts. There it is. And these are signs which they're laminated, so they hold up in the rain. They are much like the pesticide signs that folks have on their lawns when their lawns have been sprayed with pesticides. And I literally have picked up hundreds of the black stakes that you see there off lawns in my neighborhood. I cannot believe how many people spray their lawns with pesticides, but it's a good reuse of these plastics. And I'm sort of obsessed now with picking these things up. But we have shared for free these Bloom's Not Butts signs with hundreds in our community. People seem to love them. Sort of a nice, subtle message, right? It's we're not shaming the smokers. We want to educate the smokers. One of the things, as I said in the beginning, this is like an aha moment with people. Many smokers may have been smoking for years. They don't even think about the fact that they're throwing their cigarette butt on the ground. It disappears, it biodegrades. It's nothing that we really need to think about. So these are sort of been a nice messaging tool for us. The Buffalo Botanical Gardens here, we have a beautiful botanical gardens. They have a vase like this in their shop, gift shop, where they have them for free. I have a little sign next to it that sort of explains the initiative. We have them at a tool lending library, which I love because that's sort of in an underserved community, and trying to help spruce things up there. And our partners have been absolutely fantastic, taking them to their different events. We have them at garden walks, farmers markets. So this has been a really nice, subtle way, and people seem to really appreciate having these signs available. On the table there, you see those are pocket ashtrays, which people can start doing that. They can put their butt in a pocket ashtray. I bought these from Walmart. They're very accessible, good old Amazon. You can find them on Amazon. So just starting to discuss these type of things, giving people ideas is really, really helpful. We also came up with a coloring sheet, which we use for kids. I sort of tracked down an artist who did this for free for us. And it's sort of a fun, sort of one of those what does not belong here type of things where, in the water, there's cigarette butts floating and a fish is about to eat it and things like that, and kids can circle it. So we often include that as well. Another project we've been working on is Why Cigarette Butts Stink, and that's another slide coming up. Excuse me. This display is actually right here in a library. We have about 6 different libraries in the children's section. I really love the idea of educating kids on this issue. As we know from talking to smokers about quitting smoking, their kids oftentimes are the catalyst to get them to finally quit after they continue to, we'll say, nag them about quitting and the importance of the quitting. I really see kids as a huge potential to understand that this is a form of litter for their generation to come, but also to talk to their parents about it, encourage them not, or a family member, whoever, to not throw cigarette butts on the ground. So libraries have been fantastic about having these on display in the children's sections. We also have this at different nature centers in our area. New York State Parks and Rec typically have nature centers on their parks, which have thousands of students who come and visit every year on field trips. So this has been a great opportunity. They've been wonderful partners to help this exposure, again, with the kids. That's so, so important. We even have a display like this at the Niagara Falls Aquarium. They, of course, fish, water. They're very supportive of this work and encouraging folks not to be throwing their butts in the water or on the ground. And our next slide. This is really neat. This is a boat safety trailer that moves along the Niagara River and Lake Erie, and is there to educate boaters on boater safety. And this is also something through New York State Parks and Rec. And you can't really see it here, but there is sort of on the right there, a jar of cigarette butts, and we have a little, some brochures and little framed info sheet there to help get the word out to boaters. And I really, next spring, see a lot of potential. I want to really zero in on boaters because I shudder to think how many boaters are out there on the lake and the river throwing their cigarette butts in the water and not thinking twice about it. So again, great partnership there. Again, you know, once you start talking to people, especially people who care about environment, they're very willing to help, and really, really appreciate that. Our next slide is showing a plogging run, also a walk, that we've started off. We're doing a series of these throughout the year now. My husband is a big runner, and he leads runs on Wednesdays and Saturdays. And in talking to him, he's really come on board as he's running all the time and seeing how much litter is on the ground all the time. It makes him crazy. And, you know, we're hoping to do that with all the runners that are part of his running group and all of the great partnerships that he's got through all of that. So plogging, if you've never heard of it before, is actually a term from Sweden. And let's see, I have it here. Okay, plocka is pick up, and then jaga is jog in Swedish, so plogging. And this has been a really fun thing to do because we've gotten terrific media coverage of this because it is new, right? So the media is like, oh, wow, this is something new and different. And we had a plogging event this spring before the Buffalo Marathon, on Friday night before the marathon on Sunday. We got great news coverage with Spectrum News. And I just love this because it's kind of pulling in a whole different group of folks who are out and about. They're in the community, they're on the sidewalks, they're on the streets, and they getting them sort of inspired to start picking up trash, to pay attention, is really, really exciting to me. And Saucony, the shoe company, is throughout the US behind plogging events. They will help sponsor a plogging event. So if you are in an area and you're interested in maybe doing this, if you can find your Saucony rep, or I might be able to work with you to find that person through our rep here, they will provide bags and gloves and all of that. So that's a really a nice tie-in. And we're going to really continue with this and make it bigger and better. And we're looking at sort of doing a whole footprint area with plogging runs and just building a sort of a whole comprehensive initiative around this. We just spoke to someone in Ireland. They have a very robust program there. It's called Pure Mile. And they, again, work with youth and the community, and to have it sustainable. So not only are you doing a cleanup, but you're hopefully getting those community partners involved to be a part of this so that they will continue on with taking care of their community and making it a nicer place for all. So that's the end of my slides, but I just wanted to show you a few little things that we have done. I mentioned media, social media, you know, they're great opportunities. Earth Day, clearly. It's almost like our, what the Great American Smokeout used to be as far as the tobacco holiday. Earth Day, so much potential. Our environmental groups have loads of cleanups that they do around Earth Day. Waterkeeper last year had 40 cleanups. They reported picking up over 8,000 cigarette butts. The other thing I should have mentioned is our partners are now writing us into grants as far as the importance of cigarette butt litter. It's sort of one of their deliverables is trying to build awareness and making that more of their work. They also are being better about collecting the data on what's being picked up. And we're working on getting all of our groups to use the same app. There's an app called CleanSwell, which is great as far as a participant can very easily plug in there how many cigarette butts they think they picked up, how many food wrappers they think they picked up, how many plastic bottles, and all of that gets put together for your area. And it's really helpful as we move forward on trying to build awareness around this. Other great things to look into are all the national holidays. There's an environmental national holiday every single day. So, you know, National Beach Day, National Pet Day. We've had great social media engagement when we've tied in people's pets and the impact that cigarette butts can have on that, right? Nobody wants their dog eating a cigarette butt, but they're everywhere and it can happen. So things like that have been terrific, and there's a lot of potential there. So policy, of course, thank you, the Public Health Law Center, for all of your excellent information in this area. And we always hope to achieve policy someday, right? For really sustainable, big impact change. One of the members of our Kick Butts Collaborative is with the Citizens Campaign for the Environment, Brian Smith. And again, working with him, starting to build his awareness, getting it more on his radar. He now brings cigarette butt litter up frequently when he's talking to legislators about different plastics, different microplastics, and different elements in the environment that we need to be concerned about and need to be aware that we need to be more proactive. Here at Roswell Park, we have a very robust government affairs team. They have been also super supportive as far as keeping us looped into any legislation they see, any changes in this area, and then also keeping on their radar when they are talking to different legislators and when they have the appropriate time to bring it up. We recently sent out a letter of support to the UNEA End Plastic Pollution Treaty, which is looking at single-use plastics. And we wrote a letter, which was from Candace Johnson, our CEO and president here at Roswell Park, just showing our support of including cigarette butt litter as a single-use plastic, which is so exciting. And really, I mean, it is. In New York State, there's also a bill that's been proposed by Senator Krueger to stop the sale of any filtered cigarette altogether, which is huge. And all of the work that all of our folks are doing can hopefully someday help push this to getting passed, right? We need the data, we need the research, we need the community awareness, we need people behind this saying they think we need to get rid of cigarette butts. So all of these important components of moving forward in policy change. And then research. What our partners over at UB are doing is absolutely fantastic and very much working in tandem with our folks here at Roswell Park and our tobacco lab, who are studying, as John mentioned, the leaching, the breakdown, the impact that it's having on our water and our soil. We're also getting much more involved in the e-cigarette disposal area. Lexi's going to talk a little bit more about what they've done in Monroe County, and I have definitely been picking her brain about what we can do here in Erie County, sort of to model off of their successes. because this is a whole nother form of plastic that no one has really thought about. This product's so new. It's just surged onto the public health scene, and now we need to address the environmental side of it as well. So much work to do. This is just sort of boots on the ground sharing of the type of things that we've been working on to try to get the word out there in any way we can think of to help get people on board. But I really hope that you will be motivated after this and more aware and willing to maybe make some changes in your neighborhood, partner up with some folks, participate in some cleanups that your environmental agencies might be doing. And again, just building that awareness of how important this issue is. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jenna, for that informative presentation, and we'll move right on. Next, we have my wonderful colleague, Esther Agbaje. She's the lead senior staff attorney for federal regulation for the Public Health Law Center's Commercial Tobacco Control Team. Esther provides legal technical assistance on commercial tobacco control and climate justice issues. Prior to joining the Public Health Law Center, she had a career as a plaintiff's attorney with a focus on medical malpractice, personal injury, and class actions. Esther is also a former foreign affairs officer with the U.S. Department of State. And in that role, she managed rule of law projects in the Middle East, focusing on Egypt and the Gulf states. And if that wasn't enough, Esther also finds time since 2021 to serve as a representative for Minnesota State. So I'll pass it on to you, Esther.
Thank you so much, Zohal. I will work on sharing my screen here. All right, hope everyone can see that. So good afternoon, everyone. As Zohal did say, my name is Esther Agbaje, and I'm the lead staff attorney for the Federal Regulations Project at the Public Health Law Center. So for my section, I'll be sharing with some of you the policies and awareness options available in the state of New York, some of which you've heard a little bit about from Jenna, that could be useful in addressing tobacco product waste in the state. So we've heard a lot about the dangers of tobacco product waste overall, and just kind of as a little refresher to let you know what we're up against. Tobacco product waste includes waste from combustible cigarette and cigars and other nicotine products, as well as electronic or vaping devices that focus solely on nicotine delivery. The waste from tobacco products ends up in our soil, air, and water, and that further compounds the negative health effects of tobacco and nicotine products. The other unfortunate aspect of tobacco product waste is where it ends up. This is usually in sacrifice zones in areas that are already suffering from air, water, and land pollution, usually from chemicals, trash incineration, and building materials. And then compounded on top of that, these areas are usually flush with tobacco retailers. These communities have layers of poison to contend with. Tobacco product waste is an environmental justice and a health equity issue. And when people live in conditions that exacerbate or lead to poor health conditions, that can spiral and lead to negative outcomes in their economic status, educational status, and overall health and well-being. The life cycle of growing, manufacturing, and distributing tobacco comes with varied environmental impact issues. This includes the upstream aspects of the life cycle, especially the cultivation or growing stage, the curing stage, and the manufacturing stage. The mismanaged industrial waste and byproduct that comes from these processes lead to deforestation, pesticide overuse, child labor, food and water insecurity. As our previous presenters have discussed, the harms that come about are in a multitude of areas. So when we're looking here at the manufacturing process and we talk about deforestation, we're talking about billions of trees that are raised or burned every year to produce the paper and other products that go into making tobacco products. And that contributes to our greenhouse gas problem and the subsequent health issues that flow from that. And when we talk about the child labor, we're talking about children who are exposed to toxic levels of pesticides and nicotine poisoning from the handling of the tobacco leaves. All of these stages release solid waste and other toxins into the environment and affect the health and welfare of people who live near these sites. The effects of tobacco go far beyond individual health, and as you can see, tobacco product waste has a concerning environmental impact. And the places where we do tend to see most tobacco product waste is in communities of color and low-income communities that already have high rates of tobacco retailers. Schools also collect large amounts of tobacco product waste. And one study showed that schools in the Bay Area had significant tobacco product waste. And the communities of color, their waste was actually more of the combustible cigarettes and cigars and cigarillos and the plastic packaging that comes with it. But yet in the wealthier neighborhoods, the waste was more e-cigarette devices and empty flavored pods. And I imagine that probably could be replicated in other parts of the country. Tobacco product waste, of course, also ends up on our beaches, in our parks, and other public spaces. The plastics in cigarettes and electronic cigarettes do not break down, and they contribute to the growing problem of microplastics in our environment. So, knowing how harmful tobacco products are from both a health and environmental perspective leads to the big question: what are we going to do about it? And this is especially concerning when it comes to new e-cigarette products. As knowledge about the toxicity of the disposal of both combustible and electronic cigarette products grows, it is unclear who is responsible for the proper disposal of these products. Consumers tend to report that manufacturers provide little to no instruction on how to properly dispose of the electronic devices, and then those are left to get collected either in residences or schools, and especially in schools where teachers and administrators are usually confiscating e-cigarettes from young people. So on the policy options that localities and jurisdictions can consider as they begin to strategize how to address this issue. Some of the more efficient policies are those that are upstream and directly address the source of tobacco product waste. This would mean policies that regulate how tobacco manufacturers generate and dispose of waste at all levels of the manufacturing process. Other regulations that limit where and how tobacco products are sold are helpful. And the purpose of these upstream regulations is to begin to limit tobacco product manufacturing. The policies will require time and effort to enforce, but could begin to reduce the amount of tobacco products in circulation. However, since tobacco products and tobacco product waste are already saturated throughout our world, we also need midstream and downstream solutions to contain and clean up the already existing mess. These lower stream policies should avoid industry greenwashing traps and focus on environmental justice and equity. Midstream and downstream solutions on their own will not solve the problem and should be used in coordination with more upstream policies geared at limiting tobacco manufacturing. So one type of upstream solution that New York is already pursuing are sales restrictions on flavored e-cigarettes and limiting where tobacco products in general can be sold. With the appropriate investment in enforcement, this is one policy that can continue to limit the number of tobacco products that reach the general public in New York. And fortunately, New York state law does restrict the sale of flavored vaping products. But the unfortunate drawback of that law is it has some gaps, including exempting flavored e-cigarette and vaping products that have received marketing grants and orders from the US Food and Drug Administration. So thankfully right now, the FDA has not authorized any flavored e-cigarettes. And so that is a good thing, but that gap is still in the New York law, which should be fixed in the future. And unfortunately, it still also doesn't stop manufacturers from sending flavored e-cigarettes to New York. And the other unfortunate piece about that law is New York state law currently allows manufacturers and distributors to have an affirmative defense, which is basically saying that they didn't necessarily know that receiving flavored products meant that they would be sold in the public. And so that can make this law banning flavored e-cigarettes extremely difficult to enforce. So to make this policy more effective, New York should continue to strengthen its enforcement abilities at the local level to begin to remove non-authorized products from the shelves. Additionally, New York has been looking at introducing legislation that would ban cigarette filters and single-use e-cigarettes. This would also include things like small cigars and plastic tips and packaging that is not recyclable and is often discarded with the devices. The 2021 bill would have applied to wholesalers of tobacco products, and violators would have been fined at an increasing scale per each violation. And banning filters would be a good start to dispelling the myth that cigarette filters improve the safety or health of tobacco products. And reports from the Surgeon General have found that filters make cigarettes more dangerous by enabling smokers to inhale more vigorously and by encouraging the perception from smokers that cigarettes are safer if they have that filter on them. In fact, that was actually the original rationale for the filters from tobacco companies, not to actually make cigarettes any safer, but just that they appear safer. The added benefit of a filter or single-use ban is that it complements future endgame strategies. Policies that limit access to these products would see an impact on the demand and consumption of these products and lead to less environmental harms. And New York is not alone in this, as California has also introduced policies like this in a number of localities, as well as they also had a similar bill at their state level. And the difference in the California bill was that it had steeper penalties for violators and explicitly includes distributors as prohibited from selling single-use e-cigarettes, which New York may want to consider in future iterations of their own bill. Another option for consideration could be to explore whether funds from the varied tobacco industry settlements could be used for tobacco waste disposal. This could be another method for holding the industry accountable for the tobacco waste they produce in addition to the health harms. Another policy legislation area to consider are extended producer responsibility bills. These are an attractive method to address producer responsibility for disposable products. In the United States, these laws primarily affect industries that produce paint, batteries, carpets, electronics, and the like. Those laws make manufacturers develop methods for disposal and provide access to them for consumers. Now policymakers are looking to apply EPR laws to plastics and other single-use products. New York proposed a bill in 2022 to address plastic packaging, and had it gone into effect, would have also had an impact on e-cigarettes and their packaging and mechanisms for disposal. Other areas that EPR laws in New York could focus on include requiring manufacturers to reduce the amount of disposables they use, known as origination restrictions. And then manufacturers would also pay a fee for the amount of disposables used in packaging or manage the disposal recycled materials that they produce. And this would be especially important for electronic devices. Again, there are also pitfalls to consider in this legislation when such bills, if those bills aren't written in a comprehensive manner, the legislation must include clear requirements for the industry to implement disposal plans according to the highest environmental standards. And EPR laws need to clearly indicate who will have oversight and enforcement responsibility. Otherwise, without such clear guidance in these bills, the tobacco industry especially has no incentive to follow the law. As we'll hear more about shortly, New York has one of the few, if not the only, programs for disposing of electronic cigarettes. And that program is in Monroe County, and other parts of the state may want to try to emulate that. Waste management is a major concern because of the electronic devices. And so organizations, because of that, are opening themselves up to potential liability as a waste generator the more they collect these electronic cigarettes. The state legislature did introduce Assembly Bill 8884 in 2022 that would have required manufacturers of e-cigarettes to develop a recycling plan that is accessible to consumers. And while this bill does hit a lot of the right notes, future developments on this bill should specify standards to determine if a manufacturer's recycling plan is satisfactory. The recycling plan should be measured against outside environmental standards, lest the effort be subject to greenwashing again by the industry. And the bill would also do well to include clear oversight strategy. Waste management is still a problem to be solved. And so some ideas have included having different coordination across different regions to explore agreements that would allow them to share resources to create local waste management programs. And tobacco control units within a locality would do well to engage with the environmental departments in their jurisdictions to determine what waste management programs can be developed outside of legislation. One example that New York could try to follow is California's Certified Unified Program Agencies. It's known as CUPA. And the purpose of CUPA is to enforce hazardous waste laws on businesses, vape shops, and schools that generate, store, collect, or dispose of hazardous waste products like used e-cigarettes. And local jurisdictions in New York State could create similar partnerships between local waste management leaders and public health and environmental officials to develop an appropriate action plan to dispose of e-cigarettes. And, components of those plans could include coordinating collection times across different jurisdictions, entering into joint agreements with private recycling companies to dispose of e-cigarettes, and enforcing hazardous waste laws on e-cigarette retailers, distributors, and manufacturers. As we go through here quickly, additional policy options should focus on schools and school districts and how they will dispose of multiple electronic nicotine devices that they collect. Boulder, Colorado has a really great program that New York could begin to emulate. And New York could also add this to a program that they currently have through their Department of Environmental Conservation. They have a program known as Green Schools, which does offer a curriculum that schools can use to engage students on environmental issues in their community. And the department also has specific curricula related to recycling and hazardous waste management. And New York could take this opportunity to enhance the program. There's also state and local options. You can use hazmat laws and on vape shops to say that, these shops contain hazardous waste material from the nicotine that is on site in these places. And that could be another way to get at the tobacco product waste in these places. Finally, litigation. Two cases I'll just briefly run through. The city of Baltimore is suing Philip Morris, basically to say that the cigarette butts are causing damage to its land and aquatic resources, decreases property value, and lost revenue as a result of the persistent litter. So we're watching this case closely to see kind of where it goes, but it could be a pathway to open up for more cities and states to focus on litigation against the tobacco industry about the damage that tobacco product waste has on not only our health, but the environment. New York City as well is also suing e-cigarette distributors in the city because they are essentially flouting the laws that say that flavored e-cigarettes are illegal in New York. And so they want to ensure that youth are not being primarily targeted in their advertising. And this can also have an effect on tobacco product waste by being another upstream policy that would reduce the amount of e-cigarettes in the commons. So here's our contact information. I'm sure we'll see it again, but these are policy options when implemented well could have significant positive impacts on our health as well as the health of our environment. And with that, we'll turn it over to our next speakers. Thank you so much.
Oh, sorry about that. Thank you, Esther, so much for that very informative presentation. And next up, we've got Lexi Popovici and Hannah Weltzer of the American Lung Association. Lexi began her work at the ALA in 2016 and currently serves as director of the Smoking and Health Action Coalition of Livingston and Monroe counties. She's passionate about strategizing how community-driven outreach creates local policy momentum, and she earned her BS and MPA both from Cornell University. And Hannah has worked at the Smoking and Health Action Coalition of Livingston and Monroe County since 2020. She has a master's in public health, and her passion for tobacco control stems from her own experience with tobacco-related illness and disease in her family. She's committed to reducing the impact of big tobacco in local communities and youth. So take it away.
Thank you. So again, I'm Lexi Popovich, Director of the Smoking and Health Action Coalition of Livingston and Monroe Counties in Western New York. And we will be presenting on our vape disposal program that was implemented in August of 2022. So we just hit our 1-year anniversary. And basically we started educating ourselves and building our resources on this topic that came up as like a side community event back in 2001, late 2001. So we did about 6 or so months of research, and then we brought it to our local Department of Environmental Services, and that's when everything kind of took off from there. But I will throw it over to Hannah, and she will jump on.
Thanks, Lexi. So I don't want to reiterate too much of what was said. There was some really great information earlier here in the webinar. So what's the big deal? What is the big deal about disposing of these vape devices, and why is this such a, kind of buzz right now in the tobacco control industry or community? The real issue that, with these is, one, schools are becoming epicenters for device collection. This has a lot to do with the youth epidemic and addiction to nicotine and vape devices. So a lot of these behaviors of using vape devices actually occur at schools. And so we know children and youth are bringing these devices to schools, using them there. Administrators, teachers are then confiscating them from students who are seen using the vape devices or have them on their persons. And then schools are kind of left just kind of holding a bunch of vape devices. And so we work really closely with a lot of our local school districts and a lot of the counselors, drug and alcohol counselors on there. And something that we kept hearing from them was that they have drawers and drawers full of vape devices, some even going back to 2014. And so they've really been hanging on to them without a great way to get rid of them. Nobody was quite sure what to do. We actually had one school who was attempting to take apart the devices and actually had a device catch fire on school grounds. So that was really alarming to hear. And, it was something that, even though we work in tobacco control, that we didn't really think about, is where are these vape devices ending up? And what needs to be done to, kind of mitigate any impacts they may have on the environment. So we know that they pose a serious environmental risk as well as the obvious health risks. And then what makes them so challenging is that a lot of the modern designs of vape devices and e-cigarettes are meant to be disposable, so the industry says. And the issue with that is that a lot of these products are encased in like an outer plastic. So you cannot easily separate the nicotine from the lithium ion batteries. And those are the two main components that need to really be disposed of carefully and safely. Next slide, please, Lexi. So what did we do? We started by educating and engaging the right people. So this kind of started with our conversations through the schools. We met with the superintendent of schools here in Monroe County. He was wonderful, really great to work with, really interested in what we were saying, and offered his help in any way. So what we did is we started off by sending out a simple Google form. We got some information from the schools about how many vape devices they're collecting, what's their current process for disposal, and how many are they confiscating about a week. We got really great results with that, a lot of good information. And at the end of that, we realized, okay, this really is an issue that needs to be addressed. Our schools, some of them were saying they were collecting hundreds a week from their students. Obviously, that was our bigger suburban schools. So once we had that information, we kind of racked our brains about, who could we partner with this on, and, the next kind of steps. So that led us to our local government officials and also our local health department. Lexi thankfully has a great relationship with our commissioner of public health. She's worked with him for years. So he was really interested to hear what we had learned, what we were talking about, what we were thinking to do with this program. And then of course our county executive. And I really want to say the most important piece to this puzzle is the Department of Environmental Services. And that was here at Monroe County. They were more than eager to hear us out. They immediately set up a meeting with us. And I really think the game changer here was that we were able to bring examples of what these devices look like. And then once they saw, that it is a challenge to separate the two pieces, they realized, okay, there is, this isn't as easy as maybe we were thinking. And so they were really great to work with, really receptive of our information. They went back to, their partners, and Clean Harbors is their company who decided or who was able to dispose of these devices. And I do want to say that Monroe County is very fortunate that we have Eco Park, which is both county funded and staffed, and Waste Management also does support that program as well. So Eco Park is a really well-funded, well-staffed business here in Monroe County that actually handles a lot of the household waste. And I think with, those resources, we were really able to get this program off the ground. So I do realize we also cover Livingston County, which is very rural compared to Monroe County. And so we are very well aware that, you know, a vape disposal program is going to look very differently depending on what part of the state you're in and what your county really looks like. And Lexi, next.
Sorry, I was muted. So as we mentioned, this was introduced in August 2022. So you can see from the picture that was this August. That was our 1-year celebration anniversary of the vape disposal project. So we went again and did a press conference with our county executive and Department of Environmental Services, Department of Health. And as you can see in the picture behind there, there's large barrels. That was the visual for all the vapes that were collected this year. And Hannah will talk more about that later on. But so basically the policy does now prohibit all e-cigarettes and e-liquids from being disposed of in the trash in Monroe County. They do accept products that include nicotine and cannabis at the Eco Park location. And that was something that we had to work with our DES about and bring in examples of, you know, what some of the cartridges, vape cartridges, cannabis cartridges looked like, so they could provide that information to Clean Harbors to understand when they separate these certain products at their facility. But like Hannah said, we are very fortunate to have our collaboration with DES. We did a lot of research and met with Colorado and other areas that were working on their own vape disposal projects. So by the time we collected that information, DES took that again to Clean Harbors. And because of the structure of Eco Park, like Hannah said, we were very fortunate that they could come up with solutions to use the waste to energy is what they use in Buffalo at the Clean Harbor facility. So that's complete incineration of these e-cigarette products. So we mentioned that you can't separate these products and that it's dangerous to do so. So they came up with final incineration, which turns the e-cigarettes and e-cigarette products into energy. So that's basically the process of how it works, and at least how it worked for Monroe County. Okay, so a little bit more information. There was 2 different programs that were implemented. That would be the schools and the households. So for schools, products that are accepted from the schools, each school would have to fill out the conditionally exempt small quantity generator form. And that was provided to BOCES, public and private schools, to complete. Not all of the schools in our county did complete those forms, but we're really working on bridging those gaps of communication through our drug-free coalitions and community organizations to get the word out there more and provide more information on this. So there is a fee that does apply. It's $300 per 5-gallon pail, which can weigh no more than 40 pounds. So this is, after getting a year into the program, this is something we're still discussing, and we're waiting to get survey results from our schools and seeing how this has been a challenge, or if we can help integrate better resources to pay for this or include it in their hazardous waste protocol. You know, they already have hazardous waste at the schools for, you know, their art supplies and other supplies. So including things like the vape disposal program would be something that we're trying to figure out as well. But right now there is the fee for schools only. And then for households, this is free. And they recommend, of course, the use of gloves to collect any type of e-cigarette products or vape products and put those in sealed Ziploc bags that weigh less than 2.2 pounds. There are different days that there are drop-offs, and Hannah will touch upon that. But for the most part, we're working right now to continue to educate our schools on the program at hand and what opportunities there are.
Yeah, so like Lexi said, we actually just celebrated the first year of this vape disposal program, so that was really exciting. The picture there were several of those 55-gallon drums, and those are all filled with vape devices. So within the first year of this program, just in Monroe County, over 5,500 devices were collected, and 2/3 of those came from schools. So roughly 3,600 devices were from schools. This made for a total of 340 pounds of vape devices. And then once these devices were put in these metal drums, they were then transported to the Clean Harbors facility, where they were then gone through the incineration process and turned from waste to energy. So where to go from here, and some lessons that we've learned in this first year. So like Lexi mentioned, we are aware of the cost that is associated for schools to dispose of these devices. So that is something that we are working on. Like she said, if there's some resources that we can kind of integrate to cover that cost for schools, maybe some grant money, things like that. I also saw in the Q&A box that there was a few questions about tobacco industry and manufacturers being held accountable for some of this process to dispose of or recycle these devices. Assemblymember Rosenthal has actually introduced a bill, and she is actually doing that exact thing. She wants to hold some of these industries accountable for either all or some of the disposal cost and burden. So that's something really interesting to look out for. And then also the accessibility of using the disposal program. So currently Eco Park has hours of Wednesdays and Saturdays. Specifically for our schools, either you have staff member going on Wednesdays during the school week, or you have them going on Saturdays, which is then their personal time. And it also raises the point in question of if they're transporting hazardous materials, such as several vape devices, there is a possibility for fire or explosion when you have such a large number of these devices together, and that is because of the lithium-ion batteries. And then again, the sustainability Lexi kind of touched on, but we would love to see these vape devices being added to schools' hazardous waste contracts that they already have in place. Several of our schools already get hazardous waste picked up, whether that includes paint, solvents, nurses' office supplies, things of that nature. So we'd love to see those included just to make it a bit more sustainable for schools. It takes away that liability piece of having staff members transporting the materials themselves. And then, of course, gaining more community awareness. We love to educate on this topic, especially when we talk to youth. We find that smoking, tobacco products, and the environment and the damages it has is really something that is interesting to our youth. They're a very environmentally conscious generation, which is wonderful. So we're working on spreading the word with our youth, and then also our community partners and community as a whole, especially our local legislators. And again, can and will manufacturers be held accountable for disposal costs or efforts? So that is really something, I think we would love to see happen in the future, and some really exciting things, I think, coming in the future as well.
Great, thank you, and we'll pass it back.
Thank you so much, Lexi and Hannah, for that wonderful and informative presentation. So I do see we have some questions in the chat. Before we get to that, I just wanted to share a few of our resources. So there was a question earlier that was answered about the Baltimore lawsuit. And I wanted to share a blog post that we did from earlier in the year, as well as let me just pop that in the chat here, as well as our litigation tracker. If folks aren't familiar with that, it shows you the status of the case, and we keep that updated relatively frequently. So I'll just pop those in the chat here. And I'll also just, if anyone has any other questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or raise your hand. And I'll also share another resource of ours that was specifically created for New York State. If you haven't already seen it, it is the e-cigarette waste options publication that we put out earlier in the year. So I'll go ahead and share that as well. One of the questions that we had received during the registration process, and I'll just throw this out to any of the panelists that want to comment on it. I know, Hannah, you just touched on this a little bit, but about how tobacco product waste is treated differently between urban and rural areas. So if you wanted to comment on that any further, if any of the other panelists did, I'll pass it off to you.
I'll just go ahead and jump in really quick with a few thoughts on that. So we have had conversation with some of our partners across the state. And what really sticks out to me is that I think there's a huge need and possibility, I think, to kind of coordinate pickup efforts. So we know that Clean Harbors is kind of the company or contractor that is willing to handle the disposal of these devices. So what routes are they taking from maybe Eco Park to Buffalo incineration? And are there any pickup spots along the way where maybe a facility is willing to hold these metal 55-gallon drums in their local area, and then Clean Harbors can come pick them up? So I think that's something that maybe, you know, we can work on across the state, is kind of figuring out, you know, maybe like satellite locations almost of vape collection, until maybe Clean Harbors can pick them up and then move them on for incineration. So that was kind of something we had talked about with a few other partners across the state, when they're thinking about doing something like this in the more rural counties.
Thank you so much. And then we had another question here about the tobacco industry's involvement in reduced butt littering. And I'll pass that one off to Esther.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think I mentioned like greenwashing in my brief presentation, and what happens is sometimes is, depending on the industry, they may decide to sponsor a cleanup event or get involved with cleanup efforts to show that they're doing their part. But there is messaging continuing to show that, you know, there's not as much harm as we know that there is with filters, cigarette butts, and other devices. So I think, you know, we're all doing cleanups because we've heard about, which is great, but I think we also need to understand what the incentive is coming by whoever is sponsoring the cleanup.
Could I just add that folks need to be aware, there's a program called Keep America Beautiful, and quite a few of our partners have come to me and said, oh, I found this fantastic program. It's called Keep America Beautiful. You can write mini grants, you can get butt receptacles. They're trying to help clean up cigarette butts in the environment. And there are a lot of heavy hitters that are part of this program: Anheuser-Busch, Coca-Cola, Marlboro, Altria. And so it's the tobacco industry's way of saying, oh, we care about the environment. We're trying to do the right thing. We're providing communities with access to some funding to make a difference. But really, if their heart was really in it, they could get rid of filters altogether and they could address this problem head on. So it's really just a Band-Aid and a way for them to look like they're doing something good. And you do have to dig around on the website to find the funders, because when I first heard of it, I was so excited, and then that was a pretty hard stop, that we're not going to be doing anything, and the tobacco industry is not going to be a part of the solution to this problem on their own.
Thank you, Jenna. And we have another question here about what kind of options or solutions we can provide to schools and waste management agencies that are looking to get rid of vaping devices when they don't have the same kind of disposal methods in place. So I'll just throw that off to whoever has any thoughts on it.
So I can't speak, you know, specifically to other counties. I can only use our experience here. But I know our schools that don't have access to them have changed their methods a little bit of storing these devices until a solution is put in place for disposal of them. So a lot of schools are using fireproof boxes to hold these devices once they've been confiscated from students, and that just reduces a little bit of the risk of any sort of fire, explosion, or things of that nature. I would say maybe, you know, reach out to your local police department, fire department. And I believe Walgreens also advertises that they may be able to dispose of vape devices. So I would definitely check out that route and see what they have to offer. But, you know, if you can put them in some sort of fireproof box in the meantime, I think that's a really great start.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, we're at 90 minutes. I just want to remind people that the webinar was recorded, and we will be posting our recording as well as resources on our website. And if you have any further questions, feel free to reach out via email, and we can share our contact information as well. And the other thing I'll say at the end is that this is a very new and emerging area. Thanks to researchers like Dr. Atkinson, we're learning more about the impacts that these products are having on our environment and human health. And thanks to all of the great work everyone here is doing, starting to come up with solutions for it. So stay tuned. We're working on further resources ourselves and hopefully future presentations on this topic. And thank you so much for joining us today.